this mall, indoor mall, real small shops, and where did my husband go? And there was a magic store, and she figured, oh, he saw that magic store and he had to get in there. And I love close-up magic. Somebody does something right in front of you, and this guy was spinning this card, and I thought, I've got to have that trick. So anyway, and I use it quite a bit. And I was telling some people earlier about a documentary I saw called Dealt, D-E-A-L-T. It's called Dealt, like dealing cards. And it's a story of Richard Turner. And Richard Turner calls himself a card mechanic. He's not a magician. Of course, there's no such thing as magic, but he's not a magician in the usual sense. He doesn't make things disappear. But this guy can take a deck of cards and do things with that deck of cards that are really seem magical. He would have been burned at the stake, 300 years ago. And I was on a plane ride, and I was on a little TV, and I saw this thing that said Dealt, and it had this guy's name on it, Luke Coram, and I knew a Dan Coram, who was a Christian magician, and I thought, I wonder if they're related, and sure enough, they were. Luke is Dan Coram's son, and the fascinating thing about this, if he took 5 people and he said, okay, I'm going to pick number 3 here, and he would deal out a perfect hand to the number 3rd person. After shuffling the cards 3, 4, 5, or 6 times. And you think, how does he do this? And I saw him, he shuffled a deck 7 or 8 times. And then he would lay it out, and all those cards were in complete order. Now, the fascinating thing about this guy is he's blind. So if you ever get a chance to watch it, it's called Dealt. It's about Richard Turner, who is a Christian. Very, very interesting story. And you can go online and just look up Richard Turner, card mechanic, and you'll see videos. This guy's been around for a very, very long time. Fascinating story. And especially, I know there aren't a lot of young people here, but some of you young people, the persistence of this guy, being dealt, a blow, blindness, when he was like 10 years old, and what he was able to do with his life, and the practice, never giving up on a skill. He can sit there with a deck of cards, turn them around, shuffle them all in one hand, and practices 18 hours a day doing this. And no matter where he is, even when he sleeps, he has a deck of cards. Before he wakes up, his hand's already moving those cards around. It's a fascinating story. Sister also got the same disease he did, and it was interesting to see the different paths they took in order to deal with their blindness. So it's called Dealt. I don't know. It's you can rent it. It's only a couple dollars. It's really worth seeing. A couple of things. I like always listening to what other people, say before me and things that they come up with. And Mike had brought up this Harari character. And one of the things, a couple of things. When I was listening to Harari and what Mike had, it reminded me, some of you who are my age here, maybe a little bit younger, I think Glenn's probably the only person older than I am here. Ever seen the movie Dr. Strangelove? How many have seen Dr. Strangelove? Okay. The Peter Sellers character in the wheelchair is Harari. So if you ever have a chance to watch the film, he sounds like him, and what he advocates is just like what Harari is advocating, of course in a different way. It's a black comedy. Peter Sellers, I think, plays three characters. Slim Pickens is in it. He's the one that rides down the nuclear weapon from the plane. It's fun. It's a black comedy. It's great. It's George C. Scott is in it as well. But the thing about Harari is, and this is something that we're seeing in our culture today, ideas have consequences, and Harari is a homosexual. He doesn't care about your future. His future will end with him, but he wants to co-opt us so he can perpetuate his future, and so we are his children to manipulate the way he wants us to be manipulated. And it is interesting, a lot of these world leaders that we have today don't have any children. Now, this is a significant understanding of the way the secular materialist mind works. And then I want to, again, going back to Mike's talk a little bit here about economics. And I had mentioned this out of Isaiah chapter 1. Your silver has become dross, your drink diluted with water. Let me give you the context of this, because what Mike was bringing across here, there are economic consequences, and the people who control the economics control your pocketbook and control you. And there are ramifications of very poor economic policies by elitists and the effect that they have. And verse 21 of Isaiah chapter 1, how the faithful city has become a harlot, she who was full of justice, righteousness once lodged in her, but now murderers. Your silver has become dross, your drink diluted with water. Now, I want you to notice something here. Your silver has become dross and drink diluted with water is paralleled with being a murderer. Because what follows here is your rulers are rebels and companions of thieves. Everyone loves a bribe and chases after rewards. They do not defend the orphan, nor does the widow's plea come before them. And if you think about economics and inflation, again, inflation isn't higher prices. Inflation is an increase in the money supply. And it's like you dilute the value of something. And who is affected first by this? It's the widows and the orphans. It's the poorest members of the society who don't have anybody to care for them. And so when the government comes in here and does all this, supposedly to help the people, print a couple $1 trillion worth of fake money, that we talk about trickle-down economics. This is trickle-down theft, and the people affected at most are the people who are on fixed income. As the value of the money goes down, this is all the money that they have. So all of this is why I got into the issue of eschatology, because it's wedded to worldview issues. And what you think and what you plan about the future, determine what's going to come in terms of the future, is going to have an impact on everything. And so we've got Christians on both sides of the eschatological question who are missing this aspect of worldview thinking. The dispensationalists say pushes everything in the future, and some of our, I don't want to call them enemies, but critics are pushing everything beyond them. At least the dispensationalists see something happening after the rapture, but those who are critics of what we're all about is, everything is all about the end, things that we have no control over. What happens when you die, what kind of body you're going to have, et cetera. And so this is how the reason I got into this particular topic was mostly because of the dispensationalism. And let me talk about this a little bit with dispensationalism and this debate on the preterist debate. Why do the dispensationalists get a pass on the question of heresy? I want you to think about this for a moment. Dispensationalism, we know the critics of preterism, but both partial preterism and full preterism, are saying you have to look at the history of the church. You got to go back through history, and you see how through the historical process of all of this brought us to this point. And how can you now come along and question what the history of the church has already established regarding eschatology? The thing is, dispensationalism is a 19th century invention, and it has all kinds of weird things involved. The rapture, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, as I'll show here, and as you all know, most of the critics of a full preterist position use 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 as the second coming. And that's pretty standard stuff, but dispensationalists don't. The dispensationalists see this as something called the rapture of the church. It's not the second coming. It's an invisible coming of Jesus and taking the church off the earth, on which there's not a single verse in the Bible that teaches that. There's no verse in the Bible that says the church is going to be taken off the earth before, during, or after a 7-year period. And yet that is the basis of the entire dispensational model. And so there's kind of like, we have peace like a river here when it comes to eschatology with dispensationalists. This idea there's a distinction between Israel and a new redemptive group called the church. And we're oftentimes, this is all mills as well, oh, you guys believe in replacement theology. You believe the church replaces Israel. That's just plain nonsense. The Greek word for church, ekklesia, we get the word ecclesiastical out of it, is not a new word in the New Testament. It's, if you translate a Hebrew word, I think it's kahal, into Greek in the Old Testament, it's ekklesia. If you get your Hebrew New Testament and see the word ekklesia, you'll see the Hebrew word kahal. It's nothing new. The first mention of the ecclesia in the book of Acts is in Acts chapter 5. Who made up the ecclesia in chapter 5? They were all Jews. So this idea that the church replaces Israel is just nonsense. You had of course Israel, the first believers were in fact Jews, and Gentiles are grafted into an existing Jewish body of believers called the ecclesia. But this is just typical of how this debate process goes on. They create these fictional arguments and then use those as similar to like how the race card is used. When you don't have an argument, a good argument, you play one of these cards. It's kind of like magic, because once you play one of those cards, it's like the debate is over. But dispensationalism gets a pass, and while any other sort of disagreement over some eschatological issues are hammered as being heretical. And to give you an idea of this, the criticisms regarding dispensationalism go back quite a while. Some of you may have heard of Philip Morrow. Philip Morrow was a former dispensationalist. He wrote a book in 1928. It was a critique of dispensationalism. And he says, this is what you will find in the Scofield Bible. And it's listed 12 reasons why you should use the Scofield Reference Bible as the extra-biblical interpretive filter to understand the Word of God. It's kind of like a confessional statement. The dispensational Scofield Bible was kind of the confessional statement for you on how to interpret the Bible. If you wanted to interpret the Bible well, you needed the Scofield Bible. It's very much like, if you want to really understand the Bible, you have to use the Westminster Confession of Faith. And so these are kind of layers that you have to put over something, and you read the Bible through these layers. You remember those, when I was in high school, we don't have none of this sort of thing. You had the little plastic sheets that you could write on, and you put it down and at a mirror, and it flashed it up on the board, and you can put various layers on it. That's how four-color process works. Four-color process, you get all these major colors with just 4 colors, and you send it through press one time, second time, third time, fourth time, you get the whole picture. Well, this is the dispensational Scofield Bible is this layer put over there that becomes the interpretive grid to interpret the Bible. And this is it. This is the first reason why you and I must read the Scofield Bible. First, the Scofield Bible outlines the Scriptures from the standpoint of dispensational truth, and there can be no adequate understanding or rightly dividing of the Word of God except from the standpoint of dispensational truth. And that is in fact heretical. And yet it is the basis of so much in the church today, but you just can't say it's heretical. And when in fact it is. There's no scriptural warrant for almost anything within dispensationalism. The only thing that is probably true about dispensationalism is that Israel was in fact the focal point of the New Testament truth. It was Israel first, to the Jew first. This is Israel's eschatology. There was the fulfillment of all these prophecies regarding Israel. Jesus fulfilled all those prophecies. The Jews of Jesus' day were, in fact, they were brought into the full aspect of the covenant. And there's a remnant of believers, and there's people who were outside and who were the true Antichrist. They denied that Jesus Christ had come in the flesh. And I'll give you another book that came out. This one I think came out in 1940s by Oswald T. Alice. And it was a scholarly attempt to deal with dispensationalism from the Reformed perspective. And it was called Prophecy in the Church, an examination of the claim of dispensationalists that the Christian church is a mystery parenthesis which interrupts the fulfillment to Israel of the kingdom prophecies of the Old Testament. It was published in 1945. In fact, that's the actual title. Prophecy in the Church, an examination of the claim of dispensationalists that the Christian church is a mystery parenthesis which interrupts the fulfillment of Israel of the kingdom prophecies of the Old Testament. And that is relatively short compared to some book titles of about the 16th and 17th centuries. But it's a fascinating book. But Alice, more Morrow than Alice, Morrow was more of a preterist than O.T. Alice was. But O.T. Alice was a Old Testament scholar. And to kind of give you an idea of this, in one of Morrow's books, I'm not sure if it was this book, he had just about finished it, and he said he came across this book by a guy named James Farquharson. And it sounds fake, doesn't it? James Farquharson. And so I have a cousin who was the librarian at Princeton Theological Seminary. And I called up my cousin, Steve, and I said, Steve, I'm looking for this book by James Farquharson. Because anytime I needed something, I'd give him a call. And so he gave it to one of his assistants. And his assistant says, oh, this is an internet hoax. And I said, well, not in 1928 it wasn't, because Philip Morrow mentioned this James Farquharson book. And sure enough, the book is real. And he was able to get me a Xerox copy of it. And it is an exposition of, I think Daniel chapters 10 and 11. And that the book of Daniel is actually describing the Herods. That these were the upcoming bad guys that Daniel was talking about going into the New Testament. And it made perfect sense, because when you look at the New Testament, who shows up on the scene at the time of the birth of Christ? Herod does. Who shows up when John the Baptist? Herod. Who's involved in the trials of Jesus? Herod. Who's involved in the martyrdom of James in Acts chapter 12? Herod. I mean, the dragon, the idea of the red dragon is based on the Herodians. The Edomites. And so all of this material, it's amazing how much material there is out there really dealing with eschatology from a covenantal perspective. And then if you go on also, you will find that, let's see, R.B. Kuyper and John Murray described dispensationalism as an anti-reformed heresy. But again, when you got people like John MacArthur and other very popular writers, you can't call dispensationalism a heresy, because we have too many friends on the other side, we don't want to upset. But when small group like this, it's easy to call full preterist heretics, because, well, they're marginalized, and while they're a threat exegetically, and we know that dispensationalism has been out on the market for a very, very long time, but there have been tremendous critiques of dispensationalism. And in fact, this is kind of how I got into this. You guys got me into this. So people would they'd come to me and say, Gary, the hermeneutical methodology that you are using to criticize dispensationalism, why aren't you consistent with this passage, and that passage, and this passage, and that passage? And that's all I have been asking with in this particular debate, is consistency among my friends on just deal with the passage. Don't write it off and say, well, they're a fringe group, they're heretics, and we don't debate with heretics. Well, look, they're not heretics, they're people asking questions, and that you're not willing to answer for them. And I told some of my friends, don't think I'm your problem. If I go away, this doesn't go away. These people are going to continue to ask questions, and you guys are going to have to do something sometime to answer them. That's the way it is. And in essence, the cat is out of the bag now. And when these guys, my friends, wrote me a very nice letter, basically put up or shut up on answering these particular questions, the goal was to either say, yeah, I affirm these things, or they were going to condemn me as a heretic, which some of them have done. And the reason I didn't affirm the questions I was asked, because I know where the traps are, in what verses people use, and I'm going to discuss this a little bit, on these passages. I said, what I wanted was, give me the verses that go with the three questions. I'll look at each verse, and then over time, what's happened with all of this is when people would come to me and they'll say, Gary, you just need to affirm this. And I said, okay, give me the Bible passage that supports this. Now, I want the slam dunk one. You got to give me the slam dunk passage. I don't want 5 passages. For example, the deity of Christ. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Verse 14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Simple. Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary. One verse for that. Suffered under Pontius Pilate. One verse for that. Maker of heaven and earth. Verse for that. Now give me the slam dunk passage so I can affirm this. And you know what ends up happening? They don't give me one. And what they do is say, well, the creeds say this, and the Westminster Confession of Faith say that. And I said, okay, so let's look at the creeds and the confessions, and let's see where we go with those. What verses did they use? And I've used this phrase about, showing your work. Show me the work. And here's the deal. Much of the confusion and questioning today about eschatology arise from the fact that the church did not make a distinction between passages related to this generation, the AD 70 coming of Jesus, and what is described as a yet future second coming. That's the debate. That is the debate. What passages separate these two comings? Now, you will not find the phrase second coming in the Bible. It's not there. You will find, I think it's in Hebrews 9:28, that Jesus, that he will come a second time, although the Greek word time's not even there. But we'll put that in there. He will come a second time. So when you go through Scripture, you go through the New Testament, and look up all the passages about coming, the question is, how do you divide those up? Which ones apply to AD 70 and which ones apply to this definitional second coming? That's the debate on that particular topic. And I don't think that's a hard question to ask. It's just, show me your work. The Nicene Creed states, "And he shall come again with glory to judge both the living and the dead." The Apostles' Creed says, "He shall come to judge the quick and the dead." All right, what passages is this referencing? What passages support those phrases? I want to know. And so far, I haven't gotten a slam dunk answer to that. And so in the 4th century, remember, the Nicene Creed was formulated in the 4th century, 325, and then it was updated at Constantinople in 381. Now, these are fundamental creedal statements of the church. Now, a lot of people, I'll give you an example of this. This couple was coming to the Atlanta area where my wife and I live, and said, "Hey, we'd like to meet you. We'd like to come to your church." And I said, "Sure." Then we'll go out to lunch afterwards. And so we went to church, and on that particular day, we were saying the Apostles' Creed. And in there, you will find the phrase Catholic Church. Now, if you look at an original King James Bible, you will see that the titles for the divisions of the Bible, they're called the Catholic epistles. Now, it's not the Roman Catholic epistles. Catholic just simply means universal. So that phrase in the Apostles' Creed is Catholic means universal, lowercase c. And so we had lunch, and they were asking me, they were a little reluctant to ask me, here they were visiting my church, and they're questioning me about the Apostles' Creed and all that sort of thing. And I said, "Well, you're not familiar with the Apostles' Creed?" And they said, "No." So they weren't familiar with the Apostles' Creed. They weren't familiar with the Nicene Creed. And I can assure you they weren't familiar with the Westminster Confession of Faith. What they were familiar with was, guess what? The Bible. They wanted to know from the Bible. So I explained to them that the word Catholic means universal and so forth and so on, and they were satisfied with that. But there are literally tens of millions of Christians around the world that have no conception of the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, or the Westminster Confession of Faith. And when I get questions from people, I guarantee you I could never answer their questions in the affirmative by appealing to either the creeds or the Westminster Confession of Faith. I've never done that. I've never said, well, this is what the church, I'll say, yeah, this is what the church has believed, but I'll say, now, they'll ask me, well, what do you think this passage means? And I could never say to them, well, the church has already settled this, and here's what the church said about it. I couldn't get away with that. And I think a lot of Christians can't get away with that, and they don't want anybody to get away with it. Just answer the question. Answer the question with a text. So which passages were used to identify this coming, and he shall come again with glory to judge both the living and the dead, and he shall come to judge the quick. Quick means living and the dead. What verse did the Apostles' Creed? We don't know who wrote the Apostles' Creed. It wasn't the Apostles. And we do know who wrote. For the most part, we do know who were involved in the Nicene Creed, but they didn't leave a list of the passages they used to support it. So you have to do a little bit of historical digging. So Cyril of Jerusalem, who was in the 4th century, around 313 to 386. So he's right in the middle of the Nicene Creed formulation period, 325. And he's 313, 386. And this is from his lecture 15, and this is from, it's a series called The Library of Christian Classics. It was published in 1955, volume 4. And in it has much of the material from Cyril of Jerusalem. Also, if you can get your hands on Leroy Froome's 4-volume set called The Prophetic Faith of Our Fathers. It's written by a Seventh-day Adventist, but this guy did a marvelous job with finding original source documents on going back through centuries. I don't know how the guy did it. I don't know how the guy did this without the internet today. It's 4 volumes. If you go online, there are PDFs of all 4 volumes. Leroy Froome, F-R-O-O-M, and you'll find Cyril of Jerusalem. A lot of this material there. And here's the thing: if you look at Cyril of Jerusalem and dealing with the idea he will come again to judge the living and the dead, here are the passages he uses. First passage he uses. You want to guess what it is? Matthew 24:30. Now, every partial preterist, every full preterist uses Matthew 24:30 for what? This is an AD 70 passage. He also uses, went through here and found a couple of other ones that he used. Matthew 24:6 speaks of wars and reports of wars as a sign of the end times. And it is within this context that Cyril and Julian's war of the Persians relates to it. Matthew 24:7 speaks of earthquakes from place to place, and Jerusalem experienced an earthquake in 363 at a time when Julian was attempting to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. So here you have Cyril of Jerusalem identifying this judgment, which the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed uses as language, and for support for that particular view, he uses elements from Matthew chapter 24, including Matthew 24:30, which all preterists say refers to the events leading up to and including the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. So if that's the proof text for that particular statement in the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed, then they have a problem on their hands. Now, he does also use Matthew chapter 25, and the problem with that is who put up, was it Zach who put up the thing about Keith Matheson? Keith Matheson, who was a critic of full preterism, who is a partial preterist to a certain degree, in his commentary on New Testament, I think maybe Old and New Testament prophetic texts, he sees the end of Matthew chapter 25 as not referring to an end time coming, but referring to events leading up to and including the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. See, this is what I found when I started to deal with these questions that people had, that all of the inconsistency among the critics of certain prophetic belief systems. And people began to ask questions. And if you then went to Ken Gentry, Ken's a friend of mine. He may not be now, but he's a friend of mine. We went to seminary together. I went to seminary, to kind of give you a list of the people I went to seminary with. Dr. Greg Bonson was a professor there. I don't know if you know who he is. If you've ever watched the debate called The Great Debate with Greg Bonson and Gordon Stein, you've got to watch that. So Greg Bonson was a professor there. Ken Gentry was there. David Chilton was there. Jim Jordan was there. And we had a good old time just sitting around talking about all this stuff. And of course, David Chilton wrote two classic preterist books. One was Paradise Restored and Days of Vengeance, which is a commentary on the book of Revelation. He also did an extract on Matthew chapter 24. Jim Jordan, I, like Zach, owe so much to Jim Jordan on his hermeneutical model. You sit down with Jim, fascinating the things, the literary things he picks out of the Bible. That when you hear him saying that, to give some exposition of a particular difficult text. One of my favorites is the Bible prohibits boiling a kid in his mother's milk, and you think, what in the world does that mean? And if you pick up 10 commentators, you'll get 15 different views as to what it means. And none of them really deal with the text, the biblical text. And Jim says the answer is in the Bible. It's in the text. You have to find the answer in the text. He says you don't go outside of the text and say, well, this was some pagan ritual and not to do this. Now, the Bible doesn't say you can't boil a kid in milk. It says you can't boil a kid in his mother's milk. And Jim lays out how the Bible deals with this particular interpretation of that passage. It's fascinating. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. We sell a book called The Law and the Covenant by James Jordan, if you want to know. It'd take me too long to go through it. So we published a commentary by Jim Jordan called The Handwriting on the Wall, and I'll make reference to it a little bit. Some had already made reference to it in relation to Daniel chapter 12. So my question comes down to, when you're dealing with, and he shall come again with glory to judge both the quick and the dead, or the living and the dead, you're asking yourself the question, what passages did they use that were specifically so-called second coming passages? And we don't know. We have a little insight from Cyril of Jerusalem, and my guess is it was probably the view of the day. But Cyril of Jerusalem is using Matthew chapter 24, which all preterists say refers to the destruction of Jerusalem, the events leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. So was it Matthew 16, 27 through 28? Now, listen to the language of this now. Remember, coming to judge the living and the dead. Matthew 16, 27, 28 says, for the Son of Man is about, the Greek word melo is used, the Son of Man is about to come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and will then repay every person according to his deeds. Truly I say to you, not you, but them you. Truly I say to them you, there are some of those who are standing here, meaning there, who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. That sounds like a second coming passage, doesn't it? But it can't be. It is for that particular generation. And again, partial preterists, Ken Gentry, and others take that particular passage as applying to events leading up to, including the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. Now, the language is obviously hyperbole, but they're okay with that. It's okay with that. This is this is the language of the Bible. And the idea of interpreting the Bible literally, when you interpret the Bible literally, it means to interpret it in terms of its literature. So if you were to read Shakespeare, you would read it literally. That is, you would have to understand the literature of Shakespeare's era and the wording and the phraseology and the history he used. That's what the word literal means. It does not mean if it's a dragon, it's got to be a literal dragon. Of course, they never say it's a literal dragon. Or if it's going to be a giant woman out in space who's standing on the moon and has 12 stars around her head and is clothed with the sun. You take literally, what's the language there? What does that represent? What are those 12 stars? And what does the moon mean? And what does the sun mean? And then you go back to Genesis chapter 37, and you say, oh, you remember that story about Joseph and the sun, moon, and stars bowing down to him and so forth. Oh, that's okay. Then you get to Matthew chapter 24, sun, moon, stars. You put all that stuff together. That's literal. That's because it's the literature that was used in the Bible in order to make this particular case. So, when you come across a passage like that, what do you do with it? Does it apply? Is that what they were thinking about? If they are thinking about that passage, but that's not a second coming passage. And I mentioned Keith Matheson, who was a partial preterist who edited the book, When Shall These Things Be? A Reform Response to Hyper-Preterism. And this is the book that Mike was talking about, House Divided. Theirs is a response to that. And it's a pretty rough response. And Gary North always had this statement that when you write something and no one responds to it, you won the debate. And that's essentially what's happened. People have not responded to that particular book, and it's been out there for a long time. And so if and I have a thing in debate that you must find the most difficult response to your position, and you have to go at it first. So anytime you debate somebody, you need to find their strongest objection to your position, which is typically your weakest defense. And if you can't answer their strongest defense, you're going to lose the debate. And so that's anytime I debate somebody, I got to find the weakest elements of my position and lead with those things. I don't save it, hoping he won't bring it up. I lead with it in order to catch him off guard. If you've ever seen the debate between Doug Wilson and Christopher Hitchens, and Christopher Hitchens he didn't call himself an atheist, he was an anti-theist. A very, very smart guy, knew his Bible very well. This was at Westminster. It was produced and directed by Darren Doan. I was one of the producers on it. And it's a debate that takes place over different areas, over different times. It's not a two stand-up debate like the Stein debate. And anyway, they're at Westminster Theological Seminary, and Christopher Hitchens brings up Matthew chapter 24 and how this was a failed prophecy. Now, if a dispensationalist had been there, they'd still be trying to explain why Jesus wasn't mistaken. But Doug Wilson, within, I don't know, a minute maybe, simply said, oh, Jesus is referring to events regarding the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, and the language that's used there is found in the Old Testament. That language is typical of judgment language, and Jesus is taking that language and appropriating it to that particular time and space. And Christopher Hitchens, just like, I never heard that before. He was caught off guard, came back with a kind of a snide remark, but that's what you do. You don't have an answer, come back with a snide remark or play a particular card. And we had dinner with Hitchens, lunch one time and dinner with another time. And Doug was outlining the hermeneutic of the parables in the New Testament. Those weren't universal parables. They were contextual parables for that particular period of time. The prodigal son. The prodigal son there is dealing with trying to woo and get back Israel, who have gone off to the nations and squandered their inheritance and so forth. And the goal was to bring them back. And Christopher Hitchens said, I never heard this before. And it's just fascinating to see this type of thinking going on. So Keith Matheson, in his book, says, let's see here. But when the Son of Man, this is what Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 and 46. It's a passage that's typically about AD, the second coming. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all his angels with him, and he will sit on his glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, just as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats, and he will put the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. And here's what Matheson says about this. Now, Ken Gentry and others, the only reason I'm picking on Ken Gentry is because he has written about as much on eschatology as I have. A lot of these other critics have not written as much as Ken has. And so I'm bringing Ken into this because he was one of the guys who signed the letter that was the loving letter that was sent to me to deal with this. When you couch everything in love, we love you, Gary, and so forth and so on. But anyway, and I'm all for love. I'm a lover. I'm not a war. I don't like war. Give me love rather than war. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And here's what Matheson says. Matheson asks, which judgment is being described in Matthew 25, 31 through 46? He links it to Daniel 7, which he argues and I'm quoting, is a prophecy describing the inauguration of the Messianic kingdom rather than the second coming. He goes on to state that Jesus is describing the heavenly judgment of the nations that Daniel associates with the inauguration of Christ's kingdom, Daniel chapter 7, verses 9 through 10. He's right on the money, but it's schizophrenic. Here's another passage that you have to take out of the second coming basket and put it over here in AD 70 by a critic of the full preterist position. And again, these are the questions I've gotten about this, and I've tried to deal with them honestly. And if you look at Milton Terry, this is a fascinating thing. Milton Terry's Biblical Hermeneutics and Biblical Apocalyptics, his Biblical Hermeneutics book is praised by dispensationalists and non-dispensationalists, and one has to wonder whether or not dispensationalists have actually read it, because it is devastating to dispensationalism. So did the Council of Nicaea find the answer, the support for that particular place about Jesus will come again to judge the quick and the dead in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 5 through 7. Let me read it to you. But they will give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For the gospel has for this purpose been preached even to those who are dead, that though they are judged in the flesh as people, they may live in the spirit according to the will of God. The end of all things is near. Therefore, be of sound judgment and sober spirit for the purpose of prayer. The end of all things is near. Therefore, be of sound judgment and sober spirit for the purpose of prayer. The end of all things is near, he says. And this judgment was coming that was near. Now you ask yourself the question, well, what judgment was he referring to? And I say, you don't really have to know what that judgment is. All you have to know is it was near. And if you don't know what the judgment is, you can do some study like the rest of us do to try to figure it out. But you're stuck with the time indicator here of the Greek word that's used consistently throughout the New Testament, that means something that's on the precipice of happening within a particular short period of time or even a longer period of time. And here's what one commentator says. This commentator understands the problem with his position based upon what Peter just wrote. Here's what he said. Possibly, if St. Peter had thought the world would stand 20 centuries more, he would have expressed himself differently. So what does that do to the authority of the Bible? Oh, Peter didn't know what he was talking about, and so we have to help him out here. We have to help him out. And here's by another commentary. This is from Matthew Poole's commentary. I quote, but the end of all things, he writes, the last judgment, which will put an end to all the evils as well as good things of this world, is at hand. See James 5, verses 8 and 9. All right, so let's follow Matthew Poole and see what James 5, 8, and 9 have to say. Help if I had my Bible here, which I do. If you're not familiar with this passage, it's interesting. James chapter 5, verse 7. Be patient, therefore. Okay. Who's he telling to be patient? You or them? Them. But you too, you be patient too. I'm telling you to do that. And if you're married, if you're not patient, you're in big trouble. Be patient, therefore, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. The coming of the Lord? Behold, the farmer waits for the precious produce of the soil, being patient about it until it gets the early and late rains. You too be patient, you meaning them. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is near, at hand. Verse 9, do not complain, brethren, against one another, that you yourselves may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing right at the door. So here you have a passage which near is used and defined for us right at the door. Not down the block, not in the next state, not around the world, but right at the door. And you're saying, I don't understand how that can be. You don't have to understand it. You just have to believe what it says. Just move on. Do a little more study. I've been doing this for 40 years. And like Zach, I have a degree in kinesiology. I'm a physical education major. I know you're shocked, aren't you? And you say, how can you get up there and do this sort of stuff? And that's the whole point. You don't have to be a genius to do this stuff. All you have to do is just do some work, you know. And I know, look, most people don't have the time to do this. God providentially, I think it was a joke to take me and to put me in this particular position. How many of you know who Dr. Gary North was? Okay, Dr. Gary North is a good friend of mine. I've known him for many, many years. And he did this economic commentary on the Bible. 35 volumes. 35 volumes. 2 hours a day, every day but Sunday, for 30-some years. And he said he wanted someone else to do that with every other topic. So someone on education, someone on journalism, you just pick it out. He picked economics. That was his thing. He had a PhD in history. And he did this commentary, and he dedicated his commentary to somebody in each volume. They're all free online, by the way. Go to GaryNorth.com and you can read them online. It's not just a commentary on economics, it's a commentary on all kinds of stuff. And anyway, he dedicated the numbers commentary to me. and it says, Gary DeMar is proof that there's life after shot pudding. I don't know if that was an insult or what, but anyway, that's what I did. I did track and field. I was in I had college scholarships and so forth and so on, and did really quite well in it. And I became a Christian in 1973, and I didn't know anything about the Bible. 1973, right, the heyday of the late great planet Earth. Everybody was talking about that. I didn't have an answer for it. I don't know if I mentioned it to this group or not. It doesn't really matter. But on this particular talk, I know I didn't mention this. You get to be my age, you don't remember what you said or when you said it or whatever, or whether or not you did say it. But I came across this book on Matthew 24 by Marcellus Kick, and it changed my life. It changed my way I read the Bible, because he just compared Scripture with Scripture. And from that time on, I just continued to read and study, and not just in the area of eschatology, but in every area of life. So again, what passages did those who put the Nicene Creed together, what did they use? We don't know. We don't know what they used. But if they used any of these particular passages, they got it wrong. What's that? What did I do wrong? Did I do something wrong? I only have 5 minutes? No, I have 8 minutes. Please be patient with me.
And with love.
Yeah, with love. Okay, boy, time flies, man. At least for me it does. The Westminster Confession of Faith is the same problem of the Westminster Confession of Faith. If you look at the larger catechism, so you have the Westminster Confession of Faith, which is a kind of a systematic approach to the Bible, and then you have the larger and shorter catechism. Catechism question number 56, larger catechism question 56, how is Christ to be exalted in his coming again to judge the world? And there's a commentary by Johannes G. Voss. It's edited by G.I. Williamson. Now, if you read the proof text for this particular question 56, it gives Matthew 24:30 again, and a couple of others. I think it's Acts 17:31, and I think it's Matthew 25, which we already dealt with. I don't have time to look at the Acts one, but G.I. Williamson, who by the way just died actually a couple of days ago, brilliant guy, who was the editor of this, added this comment to Voss's claim that Matthew 24 versus the grouping of Matthew 24 verse 33, he got it wrong. And here's what G.I. Williamson said. Much as I regret the necessity to disagree with Dr. Voss on this point, I consider it my duty to do so. I believe the text quoted, Matthew 24:33, so you too, when you see all these things, recognize that it is near at the door, refers strictly and only to events that were certain to take place in the first century. In the time of the apostles, Jesus was speaking to living persons when he said, ye shall see all these things. He meant those people to whom he was speaking. Now G.I. Williamson would not be something of a preterist, but he was honest enough to say here that you can't use that passage for that. It's not legitimate. Now, once you start saying that about the larger catechism, that the proof text that's using for that particular passage, you're in a heap of trouble. How do you deal with these? And by the way, the Westminster Confession of Faith is non-preterist. It doesn't offer anything related to any particular preterist view. A case cannot be made for any type of preterism by an appeal to the confession and its catechisms, and yet many critics of full preterism are partial preterists. So if the Nicene Creed on the eschatology part only, the Nicene Creed and the Westminster Confession of Faith are the historical standards they are using. They have depended on 2 weak reads. Now, to say that gets me in trouble. No. To say that has gotten me into trouble. But you notice, I'm just asking them to show me the work. Show it to me. And I've been in discussions with I call them the men from Moscow, Idaho. Nice guys, and I have to say, they have been the only people who actually contacted me personally to deal with this. And they wanted me to fly out there and sit down with videotape and do it. I didn't want to do that. It was 1 full day of travel out, plus a day I was there, and 1 full day coming back. And I just didn't enjoy that. Then I was going to do a Zoom or Skype call, and I thought, I don't want to do that either. I don't want people taking clips of what I say and then using them against me. So I just decided to write a 48-page response to these things. Yes, it was a short piece. My wife will tell you it was a short piece. But you have to, I like to write because I like to cover all my bases. I like to put footnotes in and so forth. What I'm giving you right now, I've got stuff X'd out here. I'm not able to cover, and I still have another. Let's see. I got another 20 pages to go here, and I guess David's not going to give me another hour here. I'll tell you what the rest of this is. Since I have a couple minutes, I'm time am I supposed to stop? Huh? What I was going to do, and it's very simple here. I was pitting these guys against one another in their interpretation of passages. You got Ken Gentry saying Daniel chapter 12 is not referring to the general resurrection at the end of history. You got Andrew Sandlin who says it is. You got Ken Gentry who says 2 Timothy chapter 3 refers to the dissolution of the world. You got Doug Wilson who has like 8 pages of an article dealing with that. It has nothing to do with any of that. So you put all these guys and all their interpretations together, and they all contradict one another. And to me, I think that's a problem. Thank you.